I used to think that trolls existed only in fairy tales and Dungeons and Dragons. And then I got a Twitter account. It's a cold December morning in Kansas City International Airport. I'm waiting to board a plane with Jeremiah and a very pregnant Jessica, and I'm surprised and disgruntled that the crew won't pre-board us. So I activated my millennial consumerism, and I take to Twitter, complaining directly to the airline and to anyone else who cares to listen. Almost immediately, I receive a public reply from @Doorman556. @DKirzane. All Jews do is whine and complain. I'm stunned. Doesn't Doorman556 have anything better to do? Apparently not, because Doorman556 is a troll. In today's age, trolling means cloaking yourself in the anonymity of the internet to insult, harass, or provoke strangers online. It's a pathetic pastime, an unfortunate side effect of free social media, and an abusive form of indiscriminate cyberbullying. And it's a favorite weapon of modern-day anti-Semites. Anti-Semitism in America is on the rise. In the past year, Jewish cemeteries were desecrated in Philadelphia, Rochester, and St. Louis. My rabbinical school was vandalized with a swastika targeted for the first time in its 140-year history. And just last month, neo-Nazis and Klansmen marched in Charlottesville, Virginia, shouting, "Jews will not replace us," and threatening the town's only synagogue. According to the Anti-Defamation League, anti-Semitic incidents have surged in the past 2 years, leading many Jews to wonder for the first time in generations, are we truly safe in this land we call home? Anti-Semitism is not new. Antagonism toward Judaism lies at the very heart of Western society and has often given rise to violence against Jewish individuals and Jewish communities. In our own day, anti-Semitism takes many shapes, so many, in fact, that the very term can be so vague as to be unhelpful. Anti-Semitism today can refer to a zealous war fomented mainly on college campuses against Zionism. It can refer to Islamic extremists who pervert their own noble tradition to vilify Jews. And it can refer to isolated incidents of the mentally ill or the criminally deranged, such as this spring's barrage of JCC bomb threats or our own community's deadly shootings 3 years ago. In truth, each of these phenomena is unique. They all share imagery and stereotypes about who Jews are, but they arise in different groups, pursue different goals, and appear in different forms. Dominating the headlines in recent weeks has been the particular manifestation of anti-Semitism known as white nationalism, which caused the terrifying events in Charlottesville. As we more deeply understand this newest kind of racism and anti-Semitism, we can more effectively protect Jews and non-Jews alike targeted by this dark expression of hatred. According to Eric K. Ward, the executive director of the Western States Center, white nationalism is a, quote, revolutionary social movement committed to building a whites-only nation. The traditional white supremacy of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries sought to exploit racial minorities to benefit white Americans. But this new social movement is different. White nationalism, though it has roots in older white supremacy, does not want to exploit racial minorities. It wants to remove them. white nationalists believe that America was founded by and for white people alone, and that a concerted effort is underway to wage a so-called white genocide against them. They seek to seize state power in an effort to reassert white dominance, ultimately envisioning an American nation devoid of all people of color. The most prominent brand of white nationalism today is the so-called alt-right. Like anti-Semitism, the alt-right is a slippery term that has different meanings in different contexts. The concept of the alternative right has been around for nearly 10 years, and until recently, it referred to a wide range of right-wing ideologies. That's why you'll find news stories and current accounts of people who identify themselves as part of the alt-right who are not white nationalists. But in recent months, the alt-right has come to mean something very specific, a focused program of white nationalism. My use of the word refers exclusively to this ideology. Accordingly, let me be perfectly clear. The white nationalist alt-right label does not, in my mind, apply to political conservatives or to the Republican Party. I do believe that the alt-right seeks to influence American politics, but the alt-right has no standing with the actual right. Indeed, the whole concept of an alternative right implies a repudiation of American conservatism. Richard Spencer, who originally coined the term, is the torchbearer of the alt-right today. To know what they stand for, we need only listen to his own words. Our dream is a new society, an ethno-state that would be a gathering point for all Europeans. It would be a new society based on very different ideals than, say, the Declaration of Independence. When someone tells you what they stand for, believe them. The alt-right wants to hang on the Statue of Liberty a giant sign that says, whites only. Richard Spencer is the leader of today's alt-right, and he's also a bona fide anti-Semite. He put his prejudice into practice last year in a war against the Jewish community of his hometown of Whitefish, Montana. There, Spencer's mother was involved in a personal fight with a local Jewish realtor. And Spencer commented on the dispute in a podcast with Andrew Anglin. Anglin is the founder of the neo-Nazi website The Daily Stormer, which called itself the premier alt-right site before being effectively banned from the internet for its unconscionable views. A few days after their conversation, Anglin published and Spencer distributed the personal information of several members of the Whitefish Jewish community. Responding to Anglin's call to action, hundreds of trolls called, emailed, and texted hateful and offensive messages to the Jews of Whitefish. All times of day or night saw invocations of the Holocaust, invoking menacing death threats, including some against a 12-year-old boy. The torrent of profanities flowed nonstop until a lawsuit was filed against Anglin, and he directed the readers of the Daily Stormer to back off. It has taken months for the community of Whitefish to recover from this attack, and their haunting ordeal reveals the power of a fanatic with a following. The hateful assault of the Jews of Whitefish exposes the connection between two kinds of anti-Semite, the Doorman 556 internet troll and the Richard Spencer ideologue. By the numbers, most members of the alt-right are trolls, young men whose activity is contained in online message boards and whose beliefs about race rarely reach beyond their own echo chambers. But the incident in Whitefish signals a new reality. According to University of New Hampshire professor Seth Abramson, politically committed white nationalists, actual neo-Nazis and Klansmen, use social media platforms to recruit new members, taking advantage of a captive audience of confused young people who really just want to belong to something. In other words, alt-right leaders like Richard Spencer can turn to the masses of disaffected youth online to recruit real-life trolls ready to defend their radical and dangerous agenda. What happened in Whitefish happened again in Charlottesville on a much larger scale. Beckoned by charismatic leaders, scores of alt-right sympathizers poured into Charlottesville. It was one of these newcomers, 20-year-old James Fields, who murdered anti-racist protester Heather Heyer and wounded 34 others. The alt-right has spent much of the past decade in the dark corners of the internet. Today, however, the movement is energized and emboldened. The alt-right thrives on anti-Semitism, as we see in the attacks against Whitefish and Charlottesville. Indeed, as Eric Ward explains, anti-Semitism forms the theoretical core of white nationalism. This is because white nationalists need an explanation for how races they consider to be inferior could have achieved so much success in today's world. The only answer they can determine is that Jews have betrayed their own kind, other white people, enabling the success of non-white groups in order to advance their own perverse interests. During the course of my research about the alt-right, a chilling curriculum, I assure you, I spoke several times with Jacob Lebens, assistant professor of Judaic and Holocaust studies at Youngstown State University. Dr. Lebens has spent the last year studying the alt-right, in part by engaging them directly online and listening carefully and intently to what they have to say. He affirms that hatred and suspicion of Jews are essential to their movement, and he urges us to take them seriously. We have to sit up and pay attention when Andrew Anglin, the creator of the Daily Stormer, says, plain as day, quote, "The goal is to ethnically cleanse white nations of non-whites and to establish an authoritarian government. Many also believe the Jews should be exterminated. The end goal is ethnic cleansing by any means necessary." These are enemies to every Jewish value and every American ideal. And at the same time, Lebens also reminds us that even though the alt-right depends upon anti-Semitism to exist, white nationalists still spend most of their time focused on other groups. He says you should be livid about anti-Semitism, but people didn't come to Charlottesville because of Jews. Those people hate Muslims and blacks and mourn what they perceive to be the downfall of white society, the downfall of white people, and the advancement of minorities. They're not marching about Jews. Jews just give them a language, a way to unify diverse parties. In other words, white nationalists hate Jews, but they want to act against blacks and Muslims and women and immigrants and people who are transgender. Our vulnerability in the Jewish community, which for the most part still benefits from being white, helps us empathize with these other targeted groups whose standing in society is much more precarious than our own. It's satisfying to condemn the alt-right's tactics and beliefs, but it is not enough. It is our sacred duty to work to ensure that their agenda come to naught. When we hear about or experience anti-Semitism, our sense of fragility can make us shrink, can make us feel as though we are weak and unprotected. But when we stand arm in arm with people who are different from us, declaring together that America has room for us all, we emerge from our vulnerability as stronger and better people. We owe it to ourselves and to our neighbors to engage in thoughtful and collaborative, nonviolent resistance against white nationalism in all its forms. Fortunately, there are many pathways to choose from. and each of us can find one that fits our own talents and interests. Let's start with today, right this very moment. Simply by being here at Yom Kippur services, we engage in a kind of spiritual resistance against those who hate Jews. The alt-right doesn't want us here. By making room in our lives for Jewish observance, for ensuring that Judaism remains strong and vibrant in America, we, Jews and non-Jews alike, counter their aims. Some of you may know that a rally against white supremacy is taking place in Washington, D.C. as we speak. And they stand in solidarity with Jews around the country observing Yom Kippur. The organizers of the rally have stated, holding fast to Jewish tradition is also an act of resistance. Whether we pray with our legs, as civil rights heroes have done for generations, or with our mouths and our hearts, we resist the despicable goals of the alt-right by stubbornly refusing to go away. There's also important work to be done tomorrow, literally tomorrow, in cities across the country, from New York to Los Angeles, including our own. Communities will speak out in common resolve, insisting that peace overtake the terrorizing agenda of white nationalism. Such events affirm our interfaith and multiracial alliances and help inoculate us against racist rhetoric and ideology. So please, join me tomorrow night at 7 o'clock p.m. at the Church of the Resurrection, where local faith leaders, including Rabbi Nemetov, will state with a unified voice that our community will remain a safe haven for people of all colors and backgrounds, each of whom has been created in the infinitely precious image of God. And then there's the day after tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. How can we resist white nationalism in the months and years to come? First, we must continue to build bridges in our personal and our professional lives between neighbors of different backgrounds. People stand up for the individuals and communities that they know and care about. And the deeper our relationships, the deeper the commitment to one another. Houses of prayer, like our own congregation, must be beacons of hope and exemplars of unity as we create sacred communities of understanding and respect. We also have a civic responsibility to pay attention to local elections. The alt-right is currently locked out of our government, but their goals may lead them to try to change it from the inside. Richard Spencer himself has said that he may run for Congress. When a white nationalist does decide to run in a state primary or a town council election, it is our duty to make sure they get no further than the ballot box. And finally, we must be ready to participate in creative responses to alt-right demonstrations. Eric Ward, among others, strongly encourages us not to engage in counter-protests. Instead, we should be prepared to organize an entirely separate event that will draw media attention away from hate speech and focus it on a message of love. Take the example of Wunsiedel, Bavaria. When protests and legal complaints failed to deter an annual Nazi march, the town tried a different approach. Residents of the town flocked to the march, cheering the Nazis on and giving them refreshments and encouragement, because for each meter they walked, local businesses would donate 10 euros to a charity that helps people escape extremist groups. The residents of Wunsiedel successfully denounced white nationalism while making a positive difference at the same time. And they have modeled for the world how to overcome the forces of hate with creativity and compassion. The events of recent months have shaken our community, and they have shaken us awake. From last Yom Kippur to this one, much has changed. Many of us feel differently about our Jewishness today than at this time last year. And still, this year, as every year, we recite the persistently hopeful words of Kol Nidre, Miyom Kippurim Zeh ad Yom Kippurim Haba, Aleinu L'Tova. From this Day of Atonement until the next Day of Atonement, may it be well for us. We can never know the measure of a year. And though we know not what the year ahead will bring, though we know not the contents of our inscription in the book of life, we nevertheless dare to imagine that we will stand once again before the open ark to recite another Kol Nidre, and what's more, Aleinu L'Tova, all will, God willing, be well with us. But if there's one lesson this day teaches us, it's that this won't just happen all by itself. It depends upon each of us singly and all of us together, to ensure that this is a year of blessing and peace. A year in which we cultivate, as our prayer book says, the strength to resist all who would oppress us. Our principles give us inspiration. Our community gives us power. Our tradition gives us hope. Gemar Chatima Tova. May each of us, through our deeds and our thoughts, be inscribed for blessing in the book of life.
Friends, our services for the day continue. In about 10 minutes, we'd like to invite you to consider one of the 5 events that will be taking place here in our building as a way of learning more of marching with our feet, our hands, our hearts. And then at 2:30, please join us in chapel for our Torah service, where we'll have an opportunity to be inspired musically. Our service will then continue at 4:15 with Yizkur and Ne'ilah. We look forward to seeing you for the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.